Hello and welcome to a Vanguard Overdressed Standard deck profile. So this time I'm profiling the only deck that I play in Standard, which is Eugene. If you don't know, Eugene represents an Arakami playstyle in Vanguard where you're constantly getting rid of your opponent's units and then pressuring them with some attacks, some crits. It's pretty standard Vanguard, but Eugene's really cool because it's the first time that the Desert Gunners got a boss monster. For the most part, the Desert Gunners have always been a supporting group of cards in Arakami, but now they actually have a Vanguard, which is really, really nice. Also, Eugene is incredibly cheap to put together. This deck is very, very budget, as he's not the strongest ride line, but he's definitely a lot of fun, and he will always get better with upcoming support. Especially in set 3, I'll revisit Eugene, and I'll show you my updated build as it changes a little bit. But anyway, before we go into the deck profile, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Follow me on Twitch, Twitter. I'm pretty active there. I stream often, and I'm pretty funny on Twitter too. So, today we are joined by Hens, who are going to be guiding us through the Eugene deck profile. So, starting off with the ride line. For the starter, you can pick whatever. I like Lizard Runner, Undo. It's pretty funny. Sometimes people think that I'm playing Overlord, and that's pretty much it. For like 30 seconds, I think that I'm playing Overlord. Now, for the grade 1, we have the Gunning of Duststorm Nigel. So Nigel is pretty simple. When he's run upon by Randor, you Soul Charge 1. This is actually really, really impactful because by the time that you get to Eugene, you have exactly 5 soul to use Eugene's effect, which I'll cover in a little bit. Also, Nigel has another effect, which is when one of your opponent's rear guards is retired, you can Counterblast 1 retire himself to pop an opponent's unit. The reason why this is important is because it lets us continuously chain our retire effects, which is really, really strong, as we're always trying to clear the opponent's rearguard circles because we have a lot of cards that benefit from our opponent having less than open rearguard circles. For the grade 2, we have Randor. Randor is pretty strong. There's not really a reason to run him outside of the ride deck. His effect is pretty okay, but the main effect that we want is when he's run upon by Eugene, you can draw a card and then put a card from your drop into your soul. Right now, that effect doesn't really matter because we don't have any sort of cards that have effects in the soul, but in set 3, this effect will become a lot stronger, so that's why we like Randor. And then, finally, we have Eugene, the man, the myth, the legend, the GOAT, some might say. So, Eugene's skill is, one second, oh, I just need to, okay, there we go, make sure that the camera is focusing. Anyway, Eugene's effect is pretty simple. You rest 2 rear guards, and you retire one of your opponent's units, and then he gets 10,000 power. Very straightforward, means that you're assuming that you have the rear guards to rest, you're hitting for 23, which is a pretty good number. The other effect, however, is when you retire one of your opponent's units, you can Soul Blast 5, and then for every of their open rearguard circles, you get to look at the cards from the top of your deck and then call them to your rearguard circles, and then Soul Charge the rest. This effect is very situational. Unless your hand is like full of triggers, that's when you usually go for this effect because you're then trying to build a board with Eugene. He does let you chain some effects together. For example, like you have a lot of cards that leave the field, so you sometimes you end up having a couple of open rearguard circles, and it's nice to sort of like cycle those units to make sure that you can also hit triggers more often. You don't go for that effect all the time, but it's nice that it's there, as it can help you create a board out of nowhere, essentially. Very, very nice. Right. Now, moving on to the main deck. We have 3 copies of Eugene because Persona Writing is very strong, gives our front row a bunch of power, and you kind of just want to see it as much as possible. Now, for the card that makes Eugene have a little bit of pressure, we have Tribash. So, Tribash is pretty simple. When your Vanguard attacks, you put him into Soul, and your Vanguard gains a crit. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can use Tribash. You can either put him behind your Vanguard, rest him, and then that way, when your Vanguard does attack, you can put the Tribash that you rested into your Soul, and then you get that crit. Or you can sometimes swing with the Tribash. Your opponent, blocks it, doesn't block it, takes the damage, whatever, and then you can use this effect to put him into the Soul. That's usually the 2 ways that you will use Tribash. and even though he has a really simple and linear effect, it's still very, very valuable because it's also technically a soul charge, which means that we can use our massive soul to use a lot of better effects. Speaking of which, probably the best card in the deck, we have 4 copies of, I almost said 3 because I'm used to Yu-Gi-Oh! 4 copies of Giba Brachio. So, this guy puts in a lot of work. His effect is quite simple. If your Vanguard is Eugene, you can rest him, Soul Blast 1, and then retire one of your opponent's rear guards. And during the battle, at the beginning of the battle, if you basically restun him, and he gains 5,000 power. So he swings for 15, and you can either use his own effect to rest himself to, pop an opponent's rear guard, but he's also good to use Eugene's effect. So sometimes if your opponent isn't calling a lot of cards, you don't necessarily have to waste your soul. You can just use Eugene's effect to rest him, and then he unrests by himself, which is pretty nice. He puts in a lot of work, and he's the main card that we're trying to see every single game. The more copies of him that you can see throughout the game, the better. Now, for still a pretty valuable card, we have Oshikuni. If your opponent has 2 or less rear guards, he gains 5,000 power. So, he sort of baits the opponent into playing the game that we want, which is we want the opponent to commit their hand to call rear guards, so then that way we can retire them, because if they don't, well, you now have a 15k beater with an 8k booster, you're swinging for pretty good numbers, you're playing standard Vanguard in that sense. But this card is one of the cards that helps us enable our game plan, because, the opponent can technically play around them, but if they do that, they're doing what we want. Pretty simple card. Now, for one of my favorite cards to use in the deck, we have 4 copies of Dragritter Idris. So, Idris is a very, very versatile card. When one of your opponent's rear guards is retired, you can counterblast 1 and then you choose one of the following. You can put him into the soul and retire an opponent's, I believe it's grade 2 or less, or you can give him 1,000 power. So he can become a 15k booster, which is really nice, or a 15k attacker, which is also really nice, or he technically soul charges you once you're exchanging a counterblast for soul charge, to then also retire one of your opponent's rear guards. So this card is just super, super insane, and when you're using the Eugene Casino effect, you're ideally trying to find copies of this guy, because you can kind of just, he sets you up really, really nice. Now, for one of my favorite inclusions in the deck, we have 3 copies of Kizan Reiji. So, this guy's pretty simple. He is an act once per turn. Let me make sure the camera's focused. Act once per turn. Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1. Choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the same column as this, and retire it. So this guy's really, really nice at making sure that you can retire your opponent's rear guards that are, like, hiding, right? Your deck is pretty flexible, where you don't constantly have to just retire the front row. You have a lot of options, but being able to retire something in the same column is always very nice, because it means that you can, use Eugene's effect for the front row, and then use this guy for the back row, which is nice. I'm only playing 3 copies, though, because his effect is an act once per turn, and the Counterblast plus the Soul Blast in multiple copies, if you're using this every turn, if you have, like, multiple copies, it can, you can run out of resources really quickly, plus the chances of your opponent, like, calling a full field every turn isn't that high. Another cool thing about him is that you can rest him for the effect of Eugene and then use his effect because it's an act. So, you basically can get a little 2-for-1, if you will. Very, very nice. Now, moving on to the next card, we have 3 copies of Shiga Mango. So, this card is okay. It's not my favorite card to run in the deck, but we don't have a lot of better options. This card it's okay at helping you chain certain, like, it helps you sort of, assuming you don't hit a trigger, you can cycle through your rear guards pretty nicely. If you get lucky, you basically can plus a little bit. But my main gripe with her is that she retires herself. So, very quickly to go over the effect, when one of your opponent's rear guards is retired, you can retire this, look at the top card of your deck, and then call it to the rear guard circle. If you didn't, you put it into the soul. So, if you see a trigger, you soul charge it. If you see a rear guard that you want, you can call it. I think she gets a little bit better in set 3 because there is a rearguard that has an effect in Soul, and if we get more of those style of rearguards, she gets better because, you know, that if we hit one of those kinds of rearguards, we can Soul Charge them, and then if we hit something that we want to be down our opponent with, we can call them. But for right now, for the current card pool, she's not that amazing, so because of that, I'm only running 3 copies of Shigemanango. Now, finally, for the last card in the deck that is not like a staple card, we have Nigel. So I'm running an additional copy of Nigel just because I could run another Renji or I could run another Shigemanango, but I figured that I wanted a little bit more retire that didn't go into my soul but also left the field. So, you know, with Nigel's effect, he basically retires himself, but he's at least taking out an opponent's rearguard, meaning that, like, if I have, say, for example, like a card that I want to call in my hand, I can use Eugene's effect, retire a card, use his effect, retire another card, he retires himself, I can now call something to his circle, maybe it's a booster, maybe it's a Tribash, then you can sort of chain those effects together and create little combos. So I like his effect because he basically just gives me a Counterblast 1 to retire an opponent's rearguard, which is very, very nice. Now, finally for rearguards, we have 4 PGs. This is a staple in Dragon Empire. If you play any Dragon Empire deck or are planning on playing any Dragon Empire deck, this is a good investment because these won't be reprinted for a while and they are just better than the trial deck ones. Because if you have two or less cards in your hand, you don't have to discard for its effect. So if he's like the last card in your deck, you basically can just the last card in your hand, you can just use the PG without having to discard, which is really, really nice. Other than that, you don't really use it for anything else. It's literally just your PG, and you're running this one over the trial deck one because it's better. For over triggers, we're running one Dragveda. It's the Dragon Empire over trigger. It's better than Albaria just because Eugene, you don't have the biggest hand because a lot of Eugene's card design is built around the idea that you want to use the slot machine effect, but right now there aren't enough good units to use that effect. But either way, Dragveda is just good because resetting your Vanguard means that you get 2 additional drive checks, which is really, really nice. And that's pretty much it. Now, for the trigger lineup, we are running 4 of this crit and 4 of that crit. 8 crit is pretty standard, especially with the limitation rules, you can now only run 4. When the effect crits come out in set 3, I'll probably replace this one and keep playing this one just because I like the artwork more. If you like the Blaze Maidens more, play those, but yeah, 8 crit, pretty standard. We want to sack our opponent, compress our deck as much as possible, and just hit him with crits. Now, I am running 3 draws. A lot of Eugene lists run fronts, some lists don't run draws, some lists run draws. It's really up to personal preference. Now, the thing to consider is that with the 3 draw triggers and your over trigger, you're technically running 4 draws. Draw triggers just kind of help us have a little bit of a bigger hand than normal. They're also decent discards for riding off your ride deck. And like I said, Eugene, you don't have the biggest hand, so having this as like a way to sort of fill your hand back up is pretty nice. And then, you know, you just have 5k shields, you know, for simple pokes. This is pretty nice because you're not like overguarding a whole bunch, so I like him in that regard compared to the 20k fronts where, like, if you have to guard pokes, it feels like you're wasting a lot of shield, whereas this is just like you can just, you know, you can just exchange 1 for 1 with your opponent and not feel bad about it. Now for heal triggers, I'm running 4 of this dinosaur heal trigger. I think he looks pretty cute. I also like that Chikaze a lot. I'm running 4 of this heal. That's pretty much it. So, in conclusion, Eugene is really fun. It's also really cheap to build, and you will get better in set 3. Yes, the deck is sort of an uphill battle, but if you like that challenge, if you like the Eugene challenge to top your locals, then this deck is perfect for you. Again, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.